Larian's masterpiece of a video game has a surprising amount of food in it. Not just individual food items like lemons and garlic, but entire meals with lore-friendly ingredients. Now, I'm certainly no chef, but one of my favorite things to do in my free time is to try new recipes. So I figured, why not pick a handful of delicious looking meals from the game and do my best to replicate them while keeping the ingredients as accurate as I can. I should mention that because I'm vegetarian, all the meals chosen have no meat in them. But before you barbarian mains click off the video, I'm willing to bet at least one of these dishes will get your mouth watering, regardless of its lack of meat. But let's just jump right in with a meal straight from my favorite place in all of Faerun, the Underdark. After a quick ad break, of course. Thank you to Manscape for sponsoring this video. Whether you're exploring pixelated fantasies or want to keep it real world ready, Manscaped's got your sack. They sent me the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra, and I gotta say, the future of grooming is now. The new Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra has received some pretty substantial upgrades. The newly improved skin-safe trimmer blades feature longer, wider, and rounded teeth that cut through hair with ease. For those who prefer a clean, bare look, you can try the new foil shaving blade that easily replaces the trimmer, providing the option for a smooth finish. They even upgraded the light to a new LED dual temperature light to better illuminate and flatter multiple skin tones. There's honestly tons of really cool stuff in here, so head on over to manscape.com and get your hands on the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra. When you use my code BISCUIT, you'll get 20% off, free international shipping, and 2 free gifts. That's 20% off plus free shipping and 2 free gifts with promo code BISCUIT at manscape.com. Trust me when I say your balls will thank you. Thanks again, Manscaped. Now back to the video. It's no secret that the Underdark houses many a species of fungus. Due to their sheer abundance, the Dwergar have found many uses for these mushrooms, including one of their favorite dishes, Fragrant fungus stew. The only thing we really know about this stew is that it contains glow caps and is described as being fragrant. Now in the real world, we obviously don't have glow caps. The closest edible thing I could find were blue oyster mushrooms. This mushroom, when young, has the most brilliant blue cap before eventually turning gray when ready to eat. The recipe I used here is largely based on the New York Times recipe for fresh and wild mushroom stew, which is of course linked in the description. To a medium-sized pot, I'm putting 2 tablespoons of good olive oil on medium-high heat. While that warms up, I'm going to quickly dice up 1 large white onion and toss it in. I'm also just going to lightly season these with some salt and pepper. Stir occasionally until they're slightly browned and smell just heavenly. Set the onions aside and prep the remainder of the veggies. The recipe called for 3 small round tomatoes chopped, but I don't like big chunks of tomato in my stew, so I went with 3 diced Roma tomatoes instead. Next up is the fragrant part of this stew, fresh thyme and rosemary, about a teaspoon of each. It takes quite a while to remove the leaves and dice this up, so I wouldn't blame you for using the dried stuff instead. Just keep in mind, you'll be lacking that fresh flavor. Next is our garlic. The recipe calls for 3 cloves, but my philosophy is to always do a few extra, so we're going with 5. Now, I'm just prepping and separating the white from the brown mushrooms. These are the blue oysters, and to get them ready, I just cut off the tough base and pull them apart. The brown mushrooms just need a quick rinse, then the stems cut off and a rough chop. These are a mixture of portobello and shiitake. If you can get just shiitake, it would really elevate the flavor, but my grocery store only had this mixture of the two. To the same pot from earlier on high heat, I'm adding another tablespoon of oil, and once that's warm, adding the brown mushrooms. Season lightly and stir for a few minutes until most of the mushrooms have reduced in size and some of the liquid is cooked off. Lower the heat to medium, then add in your thyme and rosemary. When its divine fragrance makes its way into your nostrils, you'll be really glad you used the fresh stuff. I'm also adding about a teaspoon of red pepper flakes, a tablespoon of tomato paste, and our diced tomatoes. Cook for another minute before seasoning lightly with salt and pepper and adding 1 tablespoon of flour. Stir to incorporate, and it's finally time to bring back those amazing onions from earlier. After 1 to 2 minutes, the raw flour should be cooked off and I can add in my broth. The recipe calls for 2 cups of mushroom broth, but but I just used some leftover vegetable stock from the fridge and it turned out fine, so just use what you got. Now the author of this recipe was aiming to create a gravy-like consistency, but I don't really like the texture of mushrooms with the texture of gravy. So by the time I got to the consistency I was looking for, I'd used about 3 cups instead of 2. Let this cook for another 2 to 3 minutes before tasting for seasoning and setting aside on a separate burner on low heat. Now, it's time for my favorite part. With a smaller pot, I'm adding 1 tablespoon of butter and 1 tablespoon of that good olive oil over medium-high heat. Once the butter starts to brown, I throw in the oyster mushrooms with a little bit of salt and pepper. After 4 minutes of occasionally stirring, they've shrunk in size and browned up nicely. For the final touch, I throw in the mountain of garlic and 1 tablespoon of parsley for about 1 minute, or at least until the garlic is fragrant. This by itself is something I could eat all day long. I mean, holy shit, I can smell it through the camera. I'm finally ready to plate this up and dive in. I started by ladling in the brown mushroom stew, then finish with a healthy topping of those garlic butter mushrooms. And here is the finished product, one beautiful aromatic bowl of fragrant mushroom stew. Let's see how it tastes. Each bite of the brown mushrooms brings a wave of that umami herbaceous broth washing onto your tongue, while the oyster mushroom topping just slaps you with a garlicky, buttery, almost chicken-like flavor. If you don't like mushrooms, this recipe will for sure change your mind. The Dwergar really know what they're doing. This feeds 2 people as is, or 4 if served with polenta or pasta. Let's move on to our next recipe and see what Auntie Ethel's got baking in the oven. When Ethel isn't trying to steal children, she's in the kitchen baking her life away. Among the many gluten-filled delicacies found in her cabin, these bright orange rolls always catch my attention. This is a butter bun. Again, I really love cooking, but I'm not much of a baker. Something about it just doesn't seem to click in my brain. Thankfully, I know someone who is. This is Victoria from Pixelated Provisions. She already has a recipe for butter buns, and she's given me permission to use it in this video. Victoria actually specializes in food from video games, and she's even made a ton of really cool video game related cookbooks, including this one from Magic the Gathering, which I know some of you will absolutely adore, so be sure to send her some love. Let's get started by adding 1/3 cup of milk and 1/4 cup of bread flour to a small pot over medium-high heat. After about a minute of tiny whisking, the mixture should come together to form a smooth dough. Should being the key word. You'll notice mine looks nothing like Victoria's because I cooked mine for far too long and now it's hard as a rock. Set aside your dough mixture and heat up 1 cup of milk until it reaches 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees Celsius. Then I'm adding 1.5 tablespoons of instant yeast and letting it rest for 5 minutes. Next, I'm taking a large mixing bowl and adding 3¼ cups of bread flour, 1 tablespoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of sugar, my malformed rock dough, 1 whole egg, and the yeast milk mixture. While that comes together, let's talk about butter. In the southern US, our butter options are fairly limited, but I still went with the best I could find, which was this Kerrygold unsalted butter. When it's reached room temperature, you'll add it to your mixture 1 tablespoon at a time or until you've used an entire stick or half a cup. Victoria explicitly states not to rush this by throwing in the entire half cup of butter. Otherwise, the dough may never come together. I'm then placing the dough on a lightly floured surface and kneading for about 20 minutes or until it passes the window pane test. If you have a stand mixer, this should only take about 10 minutes on medium speed. Once you're happy with your dough, oil up a bowl and cover it for at least 1 hour or until it's doubled in size. The dough, that is, not the bowl. If the bowl doubles in size, run. After a quick knead, we can start making the dough into buns. If you have a scale, just weigh your dough ball and divide it by 12 to ensure all your buns are the same size. You're probably wondering why mine don't look the same size considering I have a scale. I apologize, I did forget to record this next part, but you'll set aside your buns to prove again for roughly 30 minutes or until they've doubled in size. While you're waiting, go ahead and preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 180 degrees Celsius. Once the buns are ready for the oven, combine 1 egg with 2 tablespoons of milk to create an egg wash. Then lightly brush the top of the buns with the mixture. Place your buns in the oven and after 23 to 25 minutes, they should come out looking golden brown and smelling absolutely wonderful. I'm not touching these yet, as this is only part 1 of 2 for dinner tonight, with my next recipe being found in the lower city of Baldur's Gate. The oily, greasy goodness of this next meal is best enjoyed after a long night at the Blushing Mermaid. This is Baldurian Mash. A recipe for this meal does not exist in the real world, but I did my best to make my own. The description of Baldurian Mash reads, a piping hot plate of vegetables and roasted potatoes topped with tomatoes, spring onions, and a perfectly fried egg. Now the name suggests something in this recipe would be mashed, and one would assume that would be the potatoes. But if we check the Forgotten Realms wiki, it has a different description, stating that the vegetables are what's mashed. I also wouldn't want to go through the trouble of roasting potatoes just to turn around and mash them. So let's see what I can do. First, I'm going to start by chopping 2 bags or 3 pounds of honey gold potatoes into bite-sized pieces. You can use any baby potato for this recipe, I just like the honey golds. I'm gonna add these to a large bowl and coat with 2 to 3 tablespoons of olive oil. Season liberally with salt and pepper before tossing everything to coat evenly. Then I'm evenly spreading the potatoes out on a large foil-covered baking sheet before preheating the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 175 degrees Celsius. While the oven warms up, I'm peeling and rough chopping 5 whole carrots. These are going to be mashed later, so there's no need to make it look pretty, but we don't want them to take forever roasting, so don't chop them too large. I'm then adding the carrots to the same bowl from earlier and doing the same song and dance. While you may think I'm using a lot of fat and salt across these recipes, you would be correct. I have some leftover thyme and rosemary from our soup, so I'm prepping 1 tablespoon of each. Both pans are headed to your preheated oven for 25 to 30 minutes or until everything is fork tender. At about 17 minutes, I pulled out the carrots and tossed in half a bag of frozen sweet peas and added it back to the oven. I know a lot of people don't like peas and carrots, so feel free to omit these entirely, but the Baldurians don't have much of a choice. They need their veggies. At the 25-minute mark, everything should be fork tender. Remove your veggies, but leave the potatoes. With the potatoes on the top rack, we're gonna set the oven to the broil setting. This blast of very high heat quickly gives the potatoes that crispy skin we all know and love. You'll have to keep a close eye on it though, as the difference between crispy skin and burnt potatoes is only a few seconds. After about a minute or so, you may need to shuffle the potatoes around to ensure not just one area is getting crispy. After about 2 minutes, mine had a beautiful dark brown skin, which means it's time to come out. To the same large bowl from earlier, I'm adding our hot, crispy potatoes, our thyme and rosemary, 1 tablespoon of onion powder, 1 teaspoon of coriander powder, 2 tablespoons of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of smoked paprika, and finally some more salt and pepper before tossing to coat. I love lots of seasoning, but if you don't, feel free to dial back on these.
Alright, so we've just tossed that. Oh! I tossed it together. It smells so fucking good. Oh!
Set your potatoes aside and with a mashing tool or a fork, mash up the peas and carrots to a consistency you're happy with. Now, you're probably wondering why I picked peas and carrots for the roasted veggies. And to be frank, I couldn't really think of any other vegetables that would not only go well with the rest of the food on the plate, but also are going to be edible once they've been mashed up. But hey, with some salt and pepper, they really aren't that bad, and it does add a nice sweetness to the dish. It's finally time to plate, and yes, the wiki explicitly says plated, not bowled. I start with a bed of mashed veggies, a generous heap of the crispy seasoned roasted potatoes, and lastly a fried egg. I'm only just now realizing that I forgot both the tomato and the green onion. Now, in my humble opinion, cold tomatoes wouldn't be very good on this, so maybe you could dice and roast a second pan of tomatoes and then add that as a garnish with the green onions. This is the only recipe I've ever made in my entire time cooking, and I was pretty impressed with myself. But what really brought it to the next level was stuffing all that deliciousness inside one of those hot butter buns. To reheat, I just gave them a spritz with some water and threw them back in the oven for a minute or two. It was a little dry, so maybe an aioli or some hot sauce. But yeah, really delicious and super fun to make. I hope I've convinced you to try at least one of these recipes, and if you'd like to see more, be sure to comment down below. Huge shout out to the members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Members get access to perks like additional uploads, ad-free access to our regular uploads, and a member's badge. If you're interested in becoming a member, be sure to check the description for more details. I'll see you all in the next one. Later.